Please save my daughter. She's my only daughter. I can't afford to lose her." Elena's voice cracked through the cold hospital air, her trembling arms clutching the fragile child to her chest. Tears blurred her vision as she fell to her knees. But instead of mercy, the attending doctor barked at her, shoving her aside. "Get out of the way. If you can't pay, we can't help." The crowd gasped, but no one moved. Elena's sobs echoed down the sterile hallway as she begged strangers for help. She thought all hope was gone, until someone powerful heard her words. "Before I reveal what happened next, smash that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story will shock you more than you can imagine." Elena's voice cracked through the sterile hallway like shattered glass. "Please save my daughter. She's my only daughter. I can't afford to lose her." Her knees hit the cold hospital floor as she clutched Sophie tighter, the child limp against her chest, her tiny breaths ragged, her cheeks pale as paper. Elena's tears streamed freely, dripping onto the child's tangled hair. Her cries weren't just words. They were the screams of a mother hanging onto her last shred of hope. But instead of compassion, the attending doctor's voice thundered above her sobs. "Step back, ma'am. If you can't pay, we can't help." His words cut like knives, sharp and unrelenting. He shoved her aside with a dismissive gesture, his white coat brushing against her like a symbol of authority turned cruel. The crowd of patients and visitors gasped, some turning away, others shaking their heads in silent judgment. Not one person stepped forward. Elena collapsed against the wall, clutching Sophie's frail body, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her voice cracked again. "Please. She's all I have. Don't let her die. I beg you." Her trembling hands tried to reach for the doctor's sleeve, but he brushed her off like she was dirt on his expensive fabric. "This is a hospital, not a charity. Pay the deposit or leave." The nurse at the counter glanced at Elena with a mixture of pity and annoyance, then turned her eyes back to her clipboard. The beeping machines, the shuffle of footsteps, the smell of antiseptic, all of it blurred together into a nightmare that refused to end. "God, please, don't take her from me," Elena whispered into Sophie's hair, rocking her as though motion alone could keep the child alive. Her voice was hoarse, breaking, her body trembling from exhaustion and hunger. A man in a gray suit waiting across the hall lowered his phone slowly. His eyes, sharp and observant, had caught every detail. His name was Richard Lawson, a billionaire, known for his power, wealth, and an iron heart that rarely bent to anyone's cries. He had come to the hospital that morning for a board meeting about his foundation's donation to medical research. But now, as Elena's pleas echoed through the corridor, something inside him shifted. At first, he told himself to ignore it. This happened every day, didn't it? People begged, people suffered, and the world kept turning. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't God. But as his gaze fell on Sophie, her tiny chest rising and falling with desperate, shallow breaths, he froze. Something about her frailty hit him like a ghost from his past. His sister, a child he couldn't save years ago, a child who had slipped through his fingers while he had stood powerless. His jaw tightened. Elena's sobs rose higher, cutting through him like claws. "Somebody please. Anyone. She's all I have." Her voice echoed again and again until it became unbearable. Richard stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the tiles. His towering frame drew immediate attention. The nurse straightened, her mouth parting in surprise. The rude doctor spun around, blinking at him. The man who had just dismissed Elena was now standing face to face with one of the wealthiest, most influential men in the city. Richard's voice came out low, commanding, and sharp as steel. "Admit the child. Now." The hallway froze. The doctor stammered. Mr. Lawson, sir, with all due respect, she hasn't." Richard cut him off, his eyes like fire. "Did I stutter?" The staff scattered like ants. The nurse hurriedly grabbed forms, shouting for a gurney. Two orderlies rushed forward to take Sophie from Elena's arms. Elena gasped, her whole body shaking as they carefully lifted her daughter. For the first time in hours, she felt the crushing weight ease, just a little. She looked up, dazed, her eyes locking with Richard's. Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her lips trembling. Richard didn't answer right away. He simply nodded at her, his jaw tight, his eyes betraying a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, humanity. Then he turned to the counter, pulled out a sleek pen, and scribbled his name across the papers without even glancing at the numbers. His voice boomed across the hall. "All expenses. Charge it to me." The nurses gawked. The doctor who had shoved Elena earlier swallowed hard, his arrogance evaporating in shame. As Sophie was rushed through the swinging double doors into the emergency ward, Elena collapsed again, but this time it was from relief. Her tears came harder, but mixed with disbelief. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you, oh God, thank you." Richard crouched slightly, his towering presence softening just enough for her to meet his eyes. "She'll be fine now. Don't thank me yet." For the first time since the nightmare began, Elena's heart dared to flicker with hope. But even as Sophie disappeared into the ward, Elena's fear gnawed at her. Would money be enough to save her daughter? And why had this man, this billionaire stranger, chosen to intervene? The hallway buzzed with whispers. "That's Richard Lawson, the billionaire. Why would he help her? Do you think they know each other?" Elena ignored them. Her hands shook as she pressed her palms together in silent prayer, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. She had no idea that the man who had just changed her life forever carried wounds of his own, wounds tied to a past that would soon collide with hers in ways she never expected. The sterile hallway felt less like a place of despair now, and more like the beginning of something unpredictable, something bigger than her, bigger than him, bigger than the walls of that hospital. And as Richard turned away from the desk, his phone buzzing with impatient board members waiting for him, he ignored it all. His eyes stayed fixed on the ward doors that had just swallowed Sophie whole. For the first time in years, business didn't matter. Money didn't matter. Something else was pulling at him, something raw, urgent, and deeply personal. The swinging doors flapped shut as Sophie disappeared into the emergency room, leaving Elena trembling in the sterile hallway, her tears falling like broken glass. She pressed her palms against her face, her chest heaving, unable to believe what had just happened. A stranger? No, not just a stranger, but a man whose name carried weight in every corner of Chicago, had paid for her daughter's life. Her whole body shook with confusion and gratitude, but also suspicion. Nothing in Elena's life had ever been free. Every hand that had stretched toward her had always asked for something in return. Richard Lawson stood still, his tall frame casting a shadow over the trembling mother. His face was unreadable, his jaw locked as though he were holding back storms of his own. He didn't like the attention he was drawing. Phones clicking, whispers spreading. He had built his empire on control, yet here he was, in a hospital hallway, derailed by a woman's desperate cries. "Sir, everything is taken care of," the nurse said, her voice shaking as she clutched the signed papers like they were gold. Richard gave her a curt nod and turned back to Elena. She looked up at him, her swollen eyes burning with both relief and disbelief. "Why?" The word fell from her lips like a cracked prayer. "Why are you helping us?" Richard's eyes lingered on hers. For a moment, the mask of the billionaire slipped, and something human, something pained flickered there. But he didn't answer. Instead, he said in a voice that brooked no argument, "Sit. Rest. You're no good to her if you collapse." Elena wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. Her knees wobbled until Richard motioned, and an orderly brought her a chair. She sank into it, her arms still trembling as though Sophie were still in her grasp. Minutes turned into an hour. The hallway clock ticked mercilessly. Elena chewed her lip until it bled, whispering prayers under her breath. Richard stayed standing, his posture as sharp as a blade, his phone buzzing with board members demanding his presence. He ignored every call. The hospital staff shot glances his way, astonished. Finally, a doctor emerged, stripping off his gloves, his face heavy with exhaustion. Elena sprang to her feet, nearly stumbling, her hands clasped together. "Is she?" The doctor cut her off with a weary smile. "She's stable. Your daughter is safe for now." Elena collapsed into tears again, covering her face with her hands. Relief crashed through her like a tidal wave. Richard exhaled sharply, though no one noticed. His fists had been clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. "She'll need ongoing care," the doctor continued. "Her condition isn't something that resolves in one night. We'll need to run tests, begin treatment immediately. It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap." Elena's relief shattered into panic. She staggered forward, clutching at the doctor's sleeve. "Please, I'll do anything." I'll work night and day. Just don't stop treating her." Richard stepped in before the doctor could respond. His voice cut through the tension like thunder. "Do what's necessary. I'll cover everything." The words stunned Elena. Her mouth fell open. She spun toward him, her eyes blazing with something between gratitude and defiance. "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I can't let you. I don't even know you. I don't want your pity." Richard's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation sparking there. He wasn't a man used to being questioned, especially not when he was throwing open his wallet to save lives. "This isn't pity," he said, his voice like stone. "It's what needs to be done." Elena shook her head, wiping furiously at her tears. "People don't just help out of kindness. Not men like you. Everyone wants something." For the first time that day, Richard's armor cracked. His eyes dropped, his throat tightening with a memory he had buried long ago. A child's laugh. A hospital bed. His sister's face growing pale as the monitors went silent. He had been too late then. Money hadn't saved her. Influence hadn't saved her. But this child, this frail, trembling little girl in the emergency ward, maybe he could save her. He looked back at Elena, his expression hardening again to hide the truth. Not everyone. Not this time. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on Elena's fragile body. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into the hope he was holding out. But life had taught her too many cruel lessons. And yet, her daughter's survival depended on him now. Hours passed. Sophie was moved into a small room, hooked up to machines, her tiny body dwarfed by the sterile bed. Elena sat at her side, stroking her daughter's hair, whispering lullabies through her tears. Richard stood in the corner, silent, a sentinel in an expensive suit, watching over a child who wasn't his. At one point, Elena turned to him. "Why are you still here? Don't you have somewhere else to be? Important things to do?" Richard's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Nothing more important than this." Elena stared at him, speechless. She wanted to push him away, to protect herself from whatever strings might be attached. But the exhaustion, the pain, the weight of everything broke through. For the first time in years, she let herself rest her head against the edge of Sophie's bed, closing her eyes as sleep claimed her. Richard watched her. He noticed the way her hair fell across her face, the exhaustion etched into every line of her features, the fierce determination even in her sleep to never let go of her daughter's hand. He felt something stir inside him, something dangerous, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. When Elena stirred awake hours later, she found a blanket draped over her shoulders. She turned sharply, her eyes darting to Richard, who sat across the room, his head bowed, his phone buzzing unanswered on the chair beside him. He had covered her without a word. Her heart clenched. Who was this man? Before she could ask, the door opened. A nurse entered with a tray, whispering that the press had already gotten wind of Richard Lawson spending the night at the hospital with a single mother and her sick child. The nurse looked nervous. Elena froze, her stomach twisting. She didn't want the world to see her humiliation splashed across headlines. Richard, however, didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed only on Sophie. As the night wore on, Elena realized one terrifying truth. Whether she liked it or not, this stranger was becoming part of her daughter's story. And part of hers. The pale morning sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft stripes across Sophie's small frame. Machines hummed steadily beside her bed, their rhythmic beeps marking the fragile line between life and loss. Elena sat close, her hand wrapped around her daughter's tiny fingers, whispering words of comfort. Exhaustion weighed on her eyes, but love burned like fire in her chest. She wouldn't leave Sophie's side, not for a second. Richard Lawson stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the city skyline. His phone vibrated constantly, missed calls, urgent texts, meetings postponed, but he ignored them all. He had spent his life chained to responsibility, money, and empire building. Yet now, for the first time in years, he felt tethered to something real. The fragile child in that bed, and the fierce mother guarding her like a lioness. Elena's voice cracked as she began to hum an old lullaby. Richard turned, watching her stroke Sophie's forehead with gentle care. Something about that moment struck him like lightning. This wasn't just a woman. She was a warrior who had carried storms alone, who had chosen strength when abandonment nearly crushed her. A knock at the door broke the silence. A nurse entered with a clipboard, nervously clearing her throat. Ms. Ramirez, the treatment plan has been approved. But her eyes flicked nervously toward Richard. The costs are significant. Elena's heart dropped. Her chest constricted, panic clawing at her throat. I'll find a way, she stammered. I'll work nights, clean houses, scrub floors, whatever it takes. Just don't stop treating her. Richard stepped forward before the nurse could respond. His voice was sharp, commanding. I already told you. Handle the treatment. Bill me. Elena spun toward him, fire in her eyes. Stop. You can't keep doing this. I didn't ask you to be our savior. Richard's gaze locked on hers, unflinching. You didn't have to ask. The air between them crackled, heavy with tension. Elena's pride battled her desperation, her lips trembling as tears welled again. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to stop intruding on her pain, but Sophie stirred just then, letting out a weak whimper. Instantly, Elena turned back to her daughter, smoothing her hair, whispering soothing words. Richard's chest tightened as he watched. He had no children of his own. He had built skyscrapers, bought companies, commanded boardrooms. But here, watching this fragile little girl cling to life, he felt smaller than he'd ever felt. For the first time in decades, money didn't feel like power. It felt like the bare minimum he could give. Later that evening, Elena dozed off in the chair, her head leaning against Sophie's bed. Richard remained seated across from them, arms folded, eyes on the child. When Sophie stirred awake, her small eyes fluttered open, weak but curious. She blinked at Richard, her tiny lips parting. Daddy. The word was faint, half-whispered, but it struck like thunder. Richard's heart slammed in his chest, his breath catching. He leaned forward instinctively, his throat tightening with something he couldn't name. Elena's eyes snapped open. She sat bolt upright, her mouth falling open. For a second, the room froze. Richard tried to speak, his lips trembling. No, sweetheart. I'm not, his voice cracked. He looked at Elena, whose face had hardened into a storm. She doesn't even know him, Elena whispered, her voice trembling with anger. She doesn't know what it's like to have a father. And now she mistakes you. She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth, her tears spilling. Richard lowered his head, shame burning through him. He had never wanted to intrude, never wanted to blur lines. But the word echoed in his mind, Daddy. A word he had never been called. A word he had secretly longed to hear. The silence was broken by another knock. This time, it wasn't a nurse. It was a man in a tailored suit, one of Richard's assistants. Sir, the press is outside. They're demanding a statement. Headlines are everywhere. Billionaire babysitter. Richard Lawson caught with single mother at hospital. The board is furious. Elena's head snapped up, her stomach twisting. She could already imagine her neighbors whispering, her dignity shredded by gossip. Her fists clenched. I knew it, she hissed. This is all just a game to you. You don't care about us. You're using us for publicity or pity. Richard turned sharply, his voice rising. Is that what you think? His eyes burned. You think I'm here for cameras? I don't give a damn about the board or the press. Let them write what they want. This isn't about them. Elena stood, her exhaustion forgotten, fury flaring. Then why are you here, Richard? Why me? Why my daughter? You don't even know us. The air was thick, electric, both of them trembling with unspoken truths. Richard's voice lowered, hoarse and raw. Because I failed before. Elena froze. Richard's fists tightened at his sides. His eyes glistened as memories tore through him. I had a sister. She was sick. We couldn't get her help in time. Money, power, connections, none of it saved her. I watched her die, and I've carried that guilt every day since. When I saw your little girl in that hallway, it was like seeing her again. I couldn't walk away. Not again. Elena's lips parted, her anger softening into shock. She saw the pain in his eyes, the cracks in his armor. For the first time, she realized this wasn't pity. This was a man haunted by loss, clinging to a second chance he never thought he'd get. Her throat tightened, her pride faltering. Richard, she whispered, but the word dissolved into silence. Sophie whimpered again, her small hand reaching toward Richard. Without thinking, he stepped forward, gently wrapping his large hand around hers. His voice softened, trembling. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. Elena watched, her chest aching, her mind spiraling. She wanted to pull Sophie's hand away, to protect her from disappointment. But the look on Richard's face, raw, broken, determined, stole the fight from her. The night wore on. Richard didn't leave. He brought Elena food she refused to eat, covered her again with his jacket when she drifted into sleep, and sat beside Sophie's bed whispering promises to a child who wasn't his, yet somehow already was. Elena, half awake, half asleep, listened through the haze of exhaustion. She heard his voice breaking as he whispered to Sophie, "I'll make it right. I'll protect you. I swear it." Tears slid down her cheeks. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to reject him. But for the first time in years, she felt less alone. The night stretched long in the hospital, the machine's steady beeps weaving into the rhythm of whispered prayers. Elena barely moved from Sophie's side, her fingers brushing her daughter's hair while her heart thudded with fear. Across the room, Richard Lawson sat stiff in the chair, his eyes red from sleeplessness but fixed on Sophie like a man guarding the last flame in a dying world. Dawn broke with streaks of gold cutting through the blinds. Elena stirred, her body aching from the hard chair, but her spirit heavier with dread. She had heard whispers among the nurses. Sophie's surgery wasn't over. There was one more hurdle, one last procedure that could mean the difference between life and death. When the doctor entered, the room froze. His face was grave. "Sophie needs immediate surgery," he said, his tone clipped. "We stabilized her last night, but her condition requires a risky operation. Without it, she won't make it." The world tilted under Elena's feet. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the bed for support. Her lips trembled. But the cost. Richard cut her off, his voice sharp and commanding. "Do it." The doctor hesitated. "Mr. Lawson, the risk is high. If something goes wrong." "Do it," Richard barked, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. His jaw clenched, his chest heaving. He turned to Elena, his eyes fierce. "She deserves a chance." Elena's heart thundered in her chest. She wanted to protest, to remind him that money couldn't buy life, that she couldn't bear to watch Sophie suffer more. But then Sophie stirred, her weak little voice whispering, "Mommy." The sound shattered Elena's doubts. She dropped to her knees by the bed, kissing her daughter's tiny hand, her tears soaking the sheets. Richard crouched beside her. For once, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a desperate man begging the universe not to rip something precious away. His hand brushed Sophie's arm gently, his lips trembling. "You fight, sweetheart. Don't give up. Not now." The surgical team prepared. Elena walked beside the gurney as they wheeled Sophie away, her fingers gripping her daughter's until the last possible second. When the doors closed, she broke. Her knees hit the floor, her sobs echoing through the corridor. Richard stood frozen, his fists clenched, his throat burning. Memories crashed into him. His sister's pale face, the machine's flatlining, the feeling of helplessness that had haunted him for decades. He couldn't lose another child. Not this one. Not Sophie. Hours dragged like years. Elena paced the waiting room, her rosary clenched in her hands, whispering desperate prayers through trembling lips. Richard sat rigid, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed low. For once in his life, he prayed too, not with polished words, but with raw, broken pleas. Finally, the door swung open. The doctor emerged, his face unreadable. Elena rushed forward, her heart in her throat. "Please, please tell me." The doctor's lips curved into a tired but genuine smile. "She's going to be okay." The surgery was successful. The room erupted in relief. Elena collapsed against the wall, sobbing with gratitude. Her body shook violently as joy flooded her veins, washing away hours of terror. Richard exhaled so sharply it sounded like a sob. He stumbled back into the chair, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. Elena looked at him through her tears. For the first time, she saw not a billionaire, not a stranger, but a man shattered by relief, a man who had given everything to keep her daughter alive. Her heart softened, her anger cracking under the weight of gratitude. When Sophie was wheeled back in, sleeping peacefully, Elena clutched her hand and kissed her forehead. She whispered thank yous to God, to the doctors, and even silently to Richard. Hours later, when Sophie was stable and resting, Richard stood by the window, staring at the sunrise. His voice was low, trembling, but certain. "Elena, I need to say this." She turned, wary, her arms folded protectively across her chest. I didn't come here for recognition. I didn't come for charity. I came because—" his voice cracked. He turned toward her, his eyes glassy with tears. "Because when I saw you begging for your daughter, I saw myself. I saw my sister. And I swore I would never let myself fail like that again." Elena's lips trembled. She wanted to hold on to her anger, to her pride, but his words sliced through her. Richard stepped closer, his voice soft now. "I don't want your gratitude. I don't want your pity. I want a chance to be part of her life, to stand where I should have stood from the start." He swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know what that means yet. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for intruding. But I can't walk away. Not now. Not ever." Elena's chest tightened. Her mind screamed with warnings. Men leave, people disappoint, hearts break. But her heart saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't here for headlines. He was here because her daughter had saved him as much as he had saved her. Her tears fell silently as she whispered, "Don't make her love you if you'll just disappear." Richard's jaw tightened, his voice steady. "I won't. Not this time." The silence between them was heavy, but different now. It wasn't filled with anger or suspicion. It was filled with fragile hope. Days turned into a week. Richard never left. He brought Sophie books, told her bedtime stories, even sang softly when Elena was too exhausted to keep her eyes open. Nurses whispered about how gentle he was, how unrecognizable he seemed compared to the ruthless billionaire they knew. When Sophie finally woke fully, her small voice broke the quiet. She looked at Richard, her eyes wide, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Daddy," she whispered again. Elena's heart clenched, tears spilling. She looked at Richard, who froze, his throat working as he swallowed the lump in it. He didn't correct Sophie this time. He just smiled faintly, brushing her hair back, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I'm here." Elena turned away, her chest heaving with emotions too big to hold. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever: safety. Not from money, not from power, but from presence. Richard caught her gaze, his eyes shining. He didn't speak, but his look said it all. "I'm not leaving." The future was uncertain, the world outside still cruel. But inside that small hospital room, something had changed. A mother who had begged strangers for help now had an ally she never expected. A child who had nearly slipped away now had not just her mother, but a man determined to fight for her future. And a billionaire who once thought his heart was beyond repair had found it beating again in the smile of a little girl who had called him daddy. And that's how a mother's desperate cry turned into a miracle that no one expected. But tell me, would you forgive him if this were your story? Smash that subscribe button right now, turn on the bell, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because the next story coming will shock you even more. Don't miss it.